Rhetorical analysis, the rubric. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the goal of why we're going over the rubric and how understanding it's going to help us. We're going to talk about the rubric itself in a little more detail than you did just a second ago, and then we're going to get a chance to look at the student analysis sample 1 before you get a chance to look at a second essay on your own. So the goal for today is going to be to understand the rubric so you can score well on the test. It's pretty simple, but the better you understand the rubric, the easier it's going to be for you to improve your score on the test. All right, so when it comes down to the rubric, as you know, it's broken up into 3 parts: the thesis, evidence and commentary, and then sophistication. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about each one of these. You can, and I have posted to Google Classroom the entire rubric. However, if you want the highlights, that's what we're going to be going over now. So thesis, what's most important is it needs to be defensible. And what this means is that you've basically got to include what the speaker is trying to accomplish and how they're attempting to accomplish this. And so if you are able to identify the speaker and what they want, all you have to do is say how they're trying to do it. Now, the easiest way to do this is to list off rhetorical devices. You don't necessarily need to list them off. If you describe what the rhetorical devices are doing, that would work as well. But easy way to get this point is just to say what the speaker's trying to do and then to list off the rhetorical devices that you're going to be writing about. Evidence and commentary. Key here, we're going to talk about this for 2 slides. First is that the evidence should be concise. You don't want to overquote. Sometimes people quote too much, and that's definitely an indication that you're not actually analyzing and talking about what the quotes mean. You're just kind of using the quotes to do the work for you, and that's not how you want it to be. It should be the other way around. Here's a word or two, and this is what the author means by this word or two. Also, not everything can be quoted. Syntax, for example, can't be quoted. You can't quote it. You have to say the short sentence. You have to say the rhetorical question. You have to say the format or the arrangement of the words. You can't actually quote the whole thing. So don't try and do that. And also remember, the author uses diction. The author has to use a specific type of diction. You have to use a descriptive word in order to go beyond the author uses diction. It's the author uses bold diction, as we're going to see in the essay in just a second, or the author uses, religious diction, whatever it might be. Now, when it comes to commentary, the important piece is that you need to connect it back to the purpose. This has to be there. If you just say, here's the evidence, it is symbolism, but you don't talk about how that symbolism will impact the audience, you're not going to get the score you want. It's going to be hard to rise above a 2 on the rubric if you're not effectively doing this well. However, if you do this really well, this is what's going to push you all the way up to a 4. So really important here, how are you explaining the author's choice and how it impacts the audience? And last but not least, we're going to talk a little bit about sophistication. Now, the easiest way to get the sophistication point is to really understand the text. If you really understand the text and you understand how the audience is being impacted, and you get the nuance of what's going on, it's not just the audience is inspired, it's what exactly is inspiring the audience. It's those little details. Like if you can get to the granular level of exactly why something works and you explain it, easiest way to do that. So here are 3 quick ways that you can get the point. There's a total of 6. Some of them are a little bit repetitive, but you can check the rubric if you'd like. But basically, if you have that nuanced understanding of the text or the world, and why like this exact phrase or this exact subject matter was so important to this specific group at this specific time, that is going to help get you the point. If you have a connection to what's going on in the world, let's say it was in a time of unrest, and then you can explain why like this specific choice the author made to use very reassuring diction and comforting diction is going to be help ease this audience because of what's going on in the world, and the test hasn't mentioned that, but you know it based on the historical context. That would be a way to help get the point. And then last but not least, if the writing is just at a really high level, this is kind of like where they leave themselves like a little bit of an opening. If it's just like great writing and they've got like great command of the language and they're expressing themselves very well, very convincing prose, they'll get the sophistication point just for their writing style. And so a couple different ways that you can get the point. Okay, just a quick refresher, 2018 prompt. This is the one where Secretary of State Madeleine Albright is giving a speech to Mount Holyoke College. And so a couple things you want to take into context. You should have been able to get a lot of this. You, of course, get the speaker, you get the audience, and you get the occasion, which is a commencement or graduation. And so there's a ton that you should have been able to get strictly from the prompt. But that said, let's jump into the essay. Okay, so this essay is in total 2 pages. It is 3 paragraphs, and it doesn't have a conclusion. And so a couple things that I'm going to point out along the way. You don't have to necessarily stick to, like, once again, it's really about understanding the text. We've talked about splitting it into beginning, middle, and end. This person kind of splits it into, like, here's the one big rhetorical device, and then here's the other big rhetorical device. And so ultimately, if you are able to figure out, what those main rhetorical devices are and how they impact the audience, this is a completely valid structure. Thinking about the beginning, the middle, and end is how we've been doing it. And I think that's a really effective way to do it as well. But this is kind of like an alternate way of just saying, like, here's the most important device, and here's how it impacts the audience. So let's get started. This first one is talking about the thesis. So we're going to get into the thesis specifically here. In her commencement speech to the graduating class of Mount Holyoke College, the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, asserts that women must expand their horizons beyond the chains of societal norms to change and impact the world, mainly by relying on powerful anaphora, and that's it. You will see that they did not actually finish this sentence because they forgot to, or they ran out of time. However, they do actually get this later in the speech. They continue to say that this is bold diction. Ideally, of course, you do want it there, but let's actually focus first on all the good things here. So first of all, you've got the commencement speech, occasion, graduating class, audience, Secretary of State, speaker. All of that is right there, and then with a clear and well-articulated purpose. Expand their horizons beyond the chains of societal norms. So Madeleine Albright wants women to look at society as it is and go beyond what those societal norm expectations are. And this is when we talk about the sophistication point, describing it as the chains of societal norms, like, that's a great prose choice because it really gets across not just, like, do women feel oppressed in society, she's talking to that, but they're held back. And that's why change is such a great point. And so this would be an example of, like, where I'm already beginning to see the sophistication point based on the language the student is using to describe what's going on. So ultimately, it's missing the second rhetorical device they were going to talk about, but it's got everything else it needs. It's succinct, it's concise. You don't need to, once again, like, this is not an AP US history one. Just get right to the point. SASPA, it's all there. All right, so let's get into the body paragraph. Albright masterfully employs anaphoras to emphasize and reinforce her overarching message. Describing the hardships women in history endured, Albright voices, each has suffered blows, but each has proceeded with courage. Each has persevered. The repetition of each has at the beginning of each phrase serves to emphasize the universal experience and adversities and obstacles. Albright utilizes the momentum generated by these monosyllabic words to allow her audience to focus and hone in on suffered, but courage has persevered. This phrase essentially encapsulates Albright's main message that despite all obstacles meticulously placed by the world, courageous women have time and time again overcame them in order to realize their own aspirations for change. So you've got a short quote, very beginning, cited correctly, and then out of that quote, it goes deeper into and say the repetition of, quote, each has. And so this is good because it's kind of framing, like, here's the quote, and then I'm going to go deeper. If you wanted to go right into the repetition of each has, you just have to make sure that you are citing what lines it was in. And so if you cite in lines 67 through 68, the repetition of each has serves this purpose. You can do that, but it doesn't, like, this isn't like exactly like a longer quote because they actually break it apart and say each has is the part we're focusing in on. So there's a lot of good focus right there. And then beyond that, it talks about how that is going to impact the audience and how they're going to feel. So right now we're looking at great, choice of a quote, great choice of, the specific phrase, and then ultimately a very good analysis of how this is going to impact the women who are sitting in the audience at the graduation speech. All right, so let's continue on. Moreover, Albright continues this message by repeating "if you aim high enough" in lines 75, 81, and 88. Similar to the common adage, "aim for the stars," Albright seeks to broaden the horizons for her audience, to dare them to venture and face the unknown. I'm not sure if that's face or not, but the writing's difficult, but that's the idea. Albright clearly understands that progress and concrete results become reality only when aspirations and desires are met with an equal magnitude of tenacity and determination. By wielding anaphras as a beacon to unite women in the crusade to challenge the world, Albright effectively conveys her motivation for her message. And so once again, before we even get to the evidence and commentary, Albright uses anaphras. She wields them as a beacon to unite women in the crusade to change the world. That is the kind of prose that is very convincing, that's going to get you the sophistication point, just because of like the high level of writing that is. You could have said Albright uses anaphras to unite women, and that would be accurate, but it's not conveying the same level of tone that Albright is using herself. And so by almost like mimicking the type of diction being used, you're kind of understatedly saying and showing how much you understand it. That said, of course, the quote is accurate, and then making the connection to aim for the stars or shoot for the stars, which is the common phrase. There's once again a connection to what is happening, a great understanding of the world, and how the women in the audience are going to be impacted. So all around, once again, we're seeing great evidence and commentary. All right, so this is the beginning of the third paragraph, and just to recap, there were two different quotes in the last one, both about anaphora, both from different sections of the essay, but both very well explained. And so at this point, I'm thinking we're probably at a 4, and I just need to confirm that that is where we're at through the rest of this essay. We've already talked about the thesis, but so far this essay is looking pretty good. So if we continue on, I'm just going to skim through this. I'm going to see that in conjunction with striking anaphras, she also employs bold diction. Okay, so bold diction is our next one, and then I'm looking through the quotes. This looks like a very long quote, so I think this might be an opportunity to actually shorten the quote and find something specific to say, but let's see how the explanation goes. So Albright claims that women defy the societal expectation, etc., etc. They're not numb to their feelings or desires, rather lying around helpless. She invokes the words that convey mobility. Okay, so now we're not just saying like there's bold diction, it's actually bold diction that indicates mobility or the ability to move, bumping and rising. Like the ocean's waves, the modern woman surges forward in great strides, rising and towering high, waiting for the critical moment to engulf and wash away the shackles of societal norms that bound women. Okay, so like once again, this author has a lot of imagery being used, and they're trying to create once again the powerful diction that Albright is using in their own words to describe it, to talk about how women will rise up and overcome these societal norms. And so it's checking the sophistication point. I think this paragraph is maybe bordering on like too much descriptive language, but they're definitely trying to get that point across. And with all the other ones that have gone well before it, I think we let this one kind of slide. It's definitely powerful diction. I think it might be a little bit over the top to describe it, but once again, it's effective. Okay, so let's check and see how they finish off the essay. So in addition, Albright continues her use of diction in the final paragraph when she asserts, etc., etc., etc. Once again, this is too long of a quote for diction, but this student has set up this system where they're quoting a longer piece and then highlighting the specific words they're using later. I think that first quote could more or less be a summary, but it's nonetheless effective in what it's doing. That said, it looks like they're doing a good job of explaining here. She argues that by donning a knight's armor of determination, women are ordered to manifest their noble goal. And so ultimately, it is doing a great job of explaining what she's saying, great job of explaining how what she's saying is landing in the audience. And ultimately, you will notice that this is actually from the last part. And so even without saying beginning, middle, and end, they've actually tracked the beginning, middle, and end of the speech. And so at this point, I think we're looking at a 4 pretty handily as well. And so 1 for a thesis, 4 for commentary. Let's talk about the sophistication point. Yeah, so did they have a nuanced understanding of the text? Absolutely. Did they make connections to the broader world and the difficulties the modern woman faces? Absolutely. And was there vivid prose throughout to help make the author's point even more clear? Absolutely. We highlighted a lot of those sightings along the way. And so ultimately, this would be an essay that gets full credit. And I wanted you just to see what that is, just so you can kind of measure against exactly what you'd be putting down in your potential essay. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Once again, numbers 440-670-6979. Office hours are 1 to 2 p.m. Thursdays and Tuesdays and Thursdays. But just reach out anytime. I'd be happy to respond.